Sure. There was no theater here to speak of before. There was the attempt at the Seattle Repertory Theater during the 30s and 40s, I guess it was. That sort of went out of business in the early 50s, wasn't it? And that was the Burton James, but that was not a professional theater company. It was an attempt at something which was professional. And until that went out of business, and then there was some touring road business in this town, and there were stock companies in the early teens and 20s. But during the 50s and 60s, there wasn't an awful lot, except for Gene Keane and the Cirque Theater. And Gene Keane sort of kept theater alive in this town.
He brought in names.
He brought in names.
Movie names that were familiar, either on the way up or on the way down in their careers.
Right, but it was a professional theater. I mean, an attempt at some kind of professional theater. But he was the only one in town doing it. And it wasn't until this town really felt its own sense of its ability to really do something after the World's Fair that it decided that it wanted to catch up with the rest of the world. And Seattle was not about to be left behind. It came out of the World's Fair with a legacy, which was extraordinary. A 72-acre park that had been reclaimed from slum, a civic auditorium that had been transformed into a quite wonderful opera house, a whole series of buildings that were put up for the fair that were paid for with no mortgages on them, and a profit of $1 million in the bank. And this was an extraordinary thing for this bootstrap town to do. And out of it came the stirrings for this theater. On that committee that was to oversee the transformation from a World's Fair into a cultural center was a young man whose name was Bagley Wright, who had come here and married a local girl, Virginia Blodell, and had put the Space Needle up with some friends for the World's Fair as a symbol of it, and was assigned to this segment of the World's Fair, the cultural affairs activities. And one of the things they decided that they would do would form a professional repertory company to fill the playhouse. The real estate really helped to determine what was going to happen in terms of a company here. The playhouse was there and was built for the World's Fair. So that happened, and he went off and with a group of people shopped for an artistic director. They went off to New York and banged on doors and asked for recommendations, and out of that came Stuart Vaughan.
Right.
It is, I think it's a fascinating story, but I think it's sort of typical of the kind of bootstrap sense of Seattle, which really just has anything that's good, that has happened good to Seattle has been done by a kind of community initiative to make it work. This was such an exciting day. This was the day we broke ground for the new building. I believe it was right at the end of 1979, I think, right before the end of the year. And I remember I was determined that we were going to break ground by the end of the year so that when history on this thing was written, it would be only 2 years after the bond issue had passed. It seemed very important to me at the time. So we went out there in the middle of winter and broke ground. But it was very exciting. People kept saying, if just get the dirt turning out there and the money will come. Well, you couldn't do that very well because the city wouldn't proceed without having the funds assured. But anyhow, we did break ground and the building is here. And this was our commemorative poster to celebrate the opening of the building. Green stripes with red relief on it. The green grew out of the fact that the architects determined that the building would be built of stucco, and stucco requires paint, and they were determined not to put another northwest gray building on the skyline. Most of the time our skies are white, not blue, and they felt that some kind of color would be an interesting and dramatic addition to the skyline. Also, the fact that the theater is nestled in a city park surrounded by green, by grass, and by poplar trees seemed to them that it should somehow blend in with all of that. The green was not without a lot of controversy. It was discussed steadily by people for the first year after it was announced that the building would be painted green stripes. I think people feel somewhat affectionate about it now. Spoke song. I think the most distinguished thing about this particular production is the poster. It's a wonderful poster by William Cummings, one of several that we commissioned from him. And I think it's kind of a collector's item. It's very good looking. It's a gentle little Irish play that we presented while we were still at the Seattle Center Playhouse in the 1980 season, I think it was. It was 1980, see that? And that's a photo of myself when my hair was number one all there and number two black. And that was, I guess, in about 1963 or 64. It was 64, I guess it would have, 65, during the first year of my internship with the theater. It's a very exciting period of time for me. Well, this is a photo, just a photo that was taken, I guess, in about 1965 of everyone who worked for the theater at that particular point in the season, for the theater's yearbook, which was a publication we sold. And it seemed like so many people at that time, and it was such a chore to get them all assembled. Now, during the course of any given week, the theater employs about 140 people, so that this would be tiny in relation to the size of the operation now.